The stars were dying. Admiral stood on the observation deck of the orbital station and watched the sky burn. The cascade had reached the outer planets 3 months ago. Jupiter's moons were already gone. Mars would follow within the year. And Earth, the blue marble that had given birth to all of humanity, would be nothing but ash and dust within a century. She was 62 years old. She had served in the Space Defense Force for 40 years. She had seen wars, disasters, and moments of terrible beauty among the stars, but she had never seen anything like this. Behind her, the door opened. Lieutenant entered and saluted. He was young, barely 25, with the kind of hope in his eyes that had lost decades ago. "Admiral," he said, "the conquered fleet is preparing to leave." "Did not turn around, all of them?" "Yes, Admiral, all 12 species. They voted this morning." She closed her eyes. For 3 weeks humanity had begged. They had sent their best diplomats, their greatest scientists, their most persuasive speakers. They had offered everything they had: trade agreements, technology sharing, cultural exchange, eternal friendship and loyalty. The Galactic Conquered had listened politely. They had nodded their various heads and tentacles and sensory organs. They had taken notes and consulted with their governments. And then they had voted. The vote was unanimous. Humanity was not worth saving. Finally turned to face. The young man's hands were shaking. She could see the tears he was trying to hold back. He had believed, truly believed, that the galaxy would help them. He had grown up watching videos of First Contact, when alien ships had descended from the clouds and offered humanity a place among the stars. He had been told that they were part of something larger now, part of a galactic family. That family had just locked them out and left them to die. "Walk with me," said. They walked through the station's corridors. Through windows, they could see the conquered fleet beginning to move. Hundreds of ships from a dozen different species, each one carrying technology that could have saved billions of human lives. Shield generators that could block radiation. Engines that could evacuate entire cities to safe worlds. Medical technology that could heal the damage the cascade was already causing. All of it leaving. All of it going home to species that had decided humanity was too young, too weak, too unimportant to save. A group of officers stood near the main viewport, watching the departure. Some of them were crying. Others stood in shocked silence. One woman, a commander whose name could not remember, was punching the wall over and over until her knuckles bled. "They called us economically non-viable," said quietly. "I read the report. They calculated the cost of saving us versus letting us die. They said we had nothing to offer that would justify the expense." "I know. They said we were too primitive to integrate successfully. They said our culture was too violent, too unpredictable." His voice cracked. "We asked them to help us, and they ran a cost-benefit analysis." Stopped walking. They had reached the command center where screens showed data from across the solar system, the cascade's progress, evacuation numbers, death tolls that grew larger every hour. "Lieutenant," she said, "what do you feel right now?" Looked at her with red eyes. "I feel angry. I feel betrayed. I feel like I want to chase those ships down and make them understand what they're doing to us." "Good," placed her hand on his shoulder. "Hold on to that feeling. Remember it, because that feeling is going to keep humanity alive." She walked to the central console and activated the station-wide communication system. Her face appeared on every screen in the orbital station, on every ship in Earth's remaining fleet, on every underground bunker and surface city where humans were preparing to face extinction. "This is Admiral," she said. "By now, you all know that the Galactic Conquered has abandoned us. They have decided that we are not worth saving. They have taken their ships, their technology, and their compassion, and they have left us to die." She paused. Across the solar system, 17 billion people were listening. "They believe we will be extinct within a century. They have already removed us from their maps. They have already erased our seat in their council chambers. To them, we are already dead." Her voice hardened. "They are wrong." In the command center, officers began to stand, wiped his eyes and clenched his fists. "I am announcing Operation Ember. Effective immediately, every resource, every ship, every mind in human space will focus on one goal: survival. We will dig into our planet. We will build ships that can withstand hell itself. We will adapt our bodies to environments that would kill us today. We will do whatever it takes to survive." She looked directly into the camera. "And we will remember. We will remember every species that left us here. We will remember their names, their faces, their words. We will write it into our history books, our songs, our very bones. Our children will learn it. Will learn it. Every generation of humanity from now until the end of time will know exactly who abandoned us." On the screens behind her, the last conquered ships were entering faster than light. In seconds, they would be gone. The warp gates that connected Earth to the wider galaxy were already powering down, sealed from the outside. "They think this is the end of humanity," said. "They think they will never see us again. They think they can forget us." She smiled. It was not a kind smile. "They are wrong about that too. Someday, when we have survived the impossible, when we have built ourselves back from ashes and dust, we will return. We will find them, and we will collect what we are owed." She cut the transmission. The command center was silent for a long moment, then stepped forward. "Admiral," he said, "what do we do first?" Turned to face the window. The conquered fleet was gone now. The sky was empty except for the burning light of the cascade, slowly eating its way toward Earth. "First we survive tonight," she said. "Then we survive tomorrow. Then we survive the next 100 years. And then, Lieutenant, we make them pay." She began giving orders. Teams were assembled. Plans were drawn. Ships were redirected to begin building the first underground shelters. Scientists started working on radiation shielding and genetic modifications. Soldiers began training for a war that might not come for centuries. Outside, Earth continued to turn. The cascade continued to advance. And humanity, abandoned by the galaxy, began the long work of refusing to die. In his quarters that night, sat at his desk and wrote a letter to his younger sister on Earth. She was 17 years old, still in school, still dreaming of traveling to alien worlds and meeting strange new species. "They left us," he wrote, "but we are not going to forget. Someday, your children or your will see the stars again. And when they do, they will carry our anger with them. They will carry our memory, and they will make sure the galaxy never forgets what it did to us." He sealed the letter and sent it to Earth. Above him, the stars continued to burn, and in the darkness between them, humanity began to change. 300 years is a long time to be angry. But humanity had practice. The first 50 years were the worst. The cascade tore through the solar system like fire through dry grass. The surface of Earth became a wasteland of radiation and ash. Cities that had stood for thousands of years crumbled and burned. Oceans boiled. Mountains melted. The sky turned the color of blood and stayed that way for decades. Billions died. But not all of them. Deep beneath the surface, in tunnels carved by desperate hands and dying machines, humanity held on. They ate recycled food and drank recycled water. They breathed recycled air and lived in recycled hope. They buried their dead in the rock and carved their names into the walls so future generations would remember. Doctor was born in the underground city of New 80 years after the abandonment. She never saw the sun. She never felt rain on her face. She grew up in metal corridors lit by artificial light, surrounded by the constant hum of machines keeping everyone alive. She became a geneticist because she wanted to change things. The human body was weak. It could not handle the radiation that leaked through the shields. It could not survive the cold or the heat or the poisoned air. Every year, fewer children were born and more of them were born sick. Decided to fix that. She worked for 40 years. She failed more times than she succeeded. She watched friends die from experiments gone wrong and enemies die from environments gone worse. She lost her husband to radiation sickness and her son to a tunnel collapse. She had every reason to give up. She did not give up. On the day she turned 120 years old, kept alive by the very modifications she had created, stood before the Remembrance Council and presented her work. She had developed a way to rewrite human DNA. Her modifications allowed people to survive radiation levels that would kill a normal human in minutes. They could breathe thinner air. They could see in darker conditions. They could heal faster and live longer. They were still human, but they were also something new. The council approved her work. Within a generation, every child born in the underground cities carried modifications. They were stronger than their parents, harder, better suited to the world they had inherited. Died at 147, surrounded by and great who had never known a world without her gifts. Her last words were simple: make them pay. Her granddaughter listened carefully. The 2nd century was the time of building. Humanity had learned to survive. Now they learned to create. Deep in the tunnels, engineers designed new ships, not the elegant vessels that the conquered flew, built for comfort and speed. These were ugly things, all armor and weapons and hatred forged into metal. They were built to survive hell because they had been designed in hell. On the ruined surface, automated factories worked day and night. Robots that could withstand the radiation gathered materials and manufactured parts. The first ships took 50 years to build. The 2nd generation took 30. By the 3rd century, humanity was producing warships faster than they could train crews to fly them. General was born 240 years after the abandonment. He was the first human in 2 centuries to walk on the surface of Earth without a protective suit. Modifications had worked. Her great-great could breathe the poisoned air and survive the burning radiation. Stood on what had once been the coast of Korea and looked out at an ocean of fire. The water was long gone, replaced by fields of crystallized salt and ash. In the distance, the skeleton of a great city rose against the bloody sky. He felt nothing but cold determination. "We are ready," he said to the officers standing behind him. He was 40 years old. He had spent his entire life training for one purpose. Every human alive had spent their entire life training for one purpose. The schools taught mathematics and science and history, but mostly they taught the names of the species who had abandoned Earth. The military trained soldiers in combat and tactics and strategy, but mostly they trained them to hate. It was not a blind hatred. It was a patient hatred, a calculated hatred, the kind of hatred that could wait 3 centuries for satisfaction. The first reclamation fleet gathered in orbit around Earth. 100 warships, each one carrying 1,000 soldiers who had never seen an alien except in training videos. Each one of those soldiers knew exactly what they were fighting for. Addressed them from the flagship Bitter Dawn. The ship was massive, built from the bones of Earth herself. Its armor was made from materials that did not exist before the abandonment. Its weapons were designed by scientists who had grown up surrounded by death and had decided to become very good at causing it. "Our ancestors begged for help," said. His voice was carried to every ship, every soldier, every corner of the fleet. They were polite, they were desperate, they were weak. He looked at the soldiers before him. Their bodies were different from their ancestors, taller, stronger, harder. Their eyes could see in spectrums that would have been invisible to the humans who had first reached for the stars. Their bones were denser. Their reflexes were faster. They were the product of 3 centuries of forced evolution. "We are not weak anymore," said. "We are not polite, and we are not going to beg." He turned to face the viewport. Beyond it, the stars waited, the galaxy that had forgotten them, the species that had left them to die. The Galactic Conquered believes humanity is extinct. They erased us from their records. They melted down our seat in their council chambers. They moved on with their lives and never looked back. His smile was the smile of a man who had been waiting his entire life for this moment. We are going to remind them. We are going to find every species that voted to abandon us. We are going to show them what 300 years of anger looks like, and we are going to collect what they owe us. The fleet began to move. 100 ships, carrying 100,000 soldiers, emerging from the shadow of a dead world. In the command center, a young officer named watched the Earth shrink behind them. She was 22 years old. She had been trained since childhood for this mission. But seeing her planet from space for the first time, she felt something unexpected. Pride. They had survived the impossible. They had outlasted the apocalypse. They had turned their death sentence into a launching pad. And now they were going to make the galaxy remember what it meant to abandon humanity. The fleet entered the jump coordinates that would take them to the nearest conquered territory. The stars stretched and twisted around them. And 300 years after the abandonment, humanity returned to a galaxy that had forgotten they existed. They would not be forgotten again. The patrol ship detected the unknown vessels at exactly 1400 hours, Galactic Standard Time. The officer on duty, a young with blue scales and 6 eyes, stared at his screen for a long moment before calling his captain. "Sir," he said, "we have contacts, 12 ships, unknown configuration. They do not match any design in our database." Captain floated over to examine the readings. There were aquatic creatures who had evolved on a water world. Their ships were filled with liquid, and they moved through it like fish through an ocean. Had commanded this patrol route for 15 years. He had never seen anything like this. "Unknown," he repeated. "That is not possible. We have records of every spacefaring species in the galaxy." "Yes, sir, but these ships do not match any of them." Studied the data. The vessels were ugly, brutal. They looked like weapons pretending to be ships. Their hulls were thick with armor, and their weapon systems were obvious even at this distance. They moved in perfect formation like predators hunting. "Hail them," ordered. The communication officer sent the standard greeting on all frequencies. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then a voice responded. It spoke in perfect, but there was something cold about it, something patient. "This is Captain of the Human Reclamation Fleet. We are here to speak with your government." Felt his blood go cold. Humans, that was impossible. The humans had died 3 centuries ago. Everyone knew that. The cascade had destroyed their world, and they had been too primitive to escape. "Humans are extinct," said. "This is some kind of deception. Identify yourselves." "I told you who we are." The voice remained calm. "Humanity survived. Humanity remembers. And humanity has come to collect what it is owed." On the human ship, Captain watched the vessels on her screen. She was 34 years old, with short black hair and eyes that had been modified to see in 12 different spectrums. She had memorized every document in the abandonment archives. She knew exactly what they had said about humanity 3 centuries ago. "Economically non-viable," she murmured to herself. "Insufficient resource return on rescue investment." Beside her, her first officer, a tall man named, checked the tactical display. "They are charging weapons, Captain." "Of course they are," almost smiled. "They cannot believe we are real, and even if they could, they are afraid." "Should we stand down, try to negotiate?" Turned to face him. "Lieutenant, what did they do when our ancestors asked for help?" His jaw tightened. "They voted against rescue. They argued that humans were too primitive to successfully integrate into galactic society." "And what did they do after the vote?" "They celebrated. Their records show they threw a festival. They called it the burden lifted." Nodded slowly. "We are not here to negotiate. We are here to remind them that actions have consequences." The fired first. Their weapons were energy-based, designed to overwhelm shields and melt through hull plating. They were advanced technology, refined over thousands of years. Against any normal opponent, they would have been devastating. Against humanity, they were useless. Human ships did not use shields. 3 centuries of survival had taught them that shields could fail, that energy systems could be disrupted. Instead, their hulls were made of materials that simply absorbed energy attacks. The weapons splashed against the human vessels like water against stone. "Return fire," ordered. Human weapons were different. They fired physical projectiles accelerated to near-light speed. The projectiles were designed to phase through energy shields, which the conquered species relied on completely. They had never faced an enemy that did not use the same technology they did. The first ship exploded 9 seconds after the battle began. Captain watched in horror as his fleet was torn apart. Ships that had served for decades became debris in moments. Crews that had trained for years died without understanding what was killing them. "How is this possible?" he screamed. "They are primitives, they should be extinct." His first officer did not answer. His first officer was already dead, killed when a human projectile punched through the bridge. Tried to run. He ordered his ship to retreat to send a warning to but the human vessels were faster. They surrounded his ship like wolves surrounding wounded prey. A human shuttle docked with his vessel, heard the screech of metal as something cut through his hull. Then there were footsteps, heavy footsteps, moving through the water-filled corridors of his ship. The door to his bridge opened. Captain stepped through. She wore a suit of armor that had been designed to function in any environment. Water, vacuum, fire, poison. 3 centuries of surviving impossible conditions had made humans very good at adapting. She looked at with eyes that held no mercy. "Captain of the patrol fleet," she said, "you are now a prisoner of the human reclamation fleet." Tried to speak, but terror had frozen his voice. This could not be happening. Humans were extinct. Everyone knew that. The conquered had made sure of it. Walked closer. She moved through the water as easily as he did, her suit adjusting to the environment without effort. 300 years ago, she said, your species voted to let humanity die. You calculated the cost of saving us and decided we were not worth it. You threw a celebration when the vote passed. She stopped in front of him. Her eyes were cold and patient, like the eyes of a predator that had been stalking its prey for centuries. We did not die. We survived. We evolved. We built ships and weapons and an army of soldiers who have spent their entire lives preparing for this moment. Finally found his voice. "What do you want?" Considered the question. Outside, the remains of his fleet drifted through space. 12 ships destroyed in less than 10 minutes. 300 years of assumed superiority shattered in moments. "Everything," she said. "Your technology, your resources, your star charts, your complete and total surrender. And if we refuse?" "Then we will take it anyway," smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "But first we want something else, something that cannot be taken by force." She activated a device on her wrist. A holographic recorder began documenting everything. "You will broadcast a message to the entire galactic conquered. You will tell them that humanity has returned. You will tell them that we survived the impossible, and you will apologize." Blinked all 6 of his eyes. "Apologize." "You will say that you were wrong, that humanity deserved to live, that your decision to abandon us was cowardice, and that cowardice will haunt your species forever." I cannot." Leaned close, her voice dropped to a whisper. "You left us to die. You watched our world burn and did nothing. You celebrated our extinction and moved on with your lives." She straightened. "Now you will face the consequences. You will apologize, and then you will tell the other species we are coming." She turned and walked back toward the door. Her soldiers secured the crew and began downloading every piece of data from the ship's computers. Behind her, Captain sank to the floor of his bridge. His world had just ended. Everything his species believed about the galaxy had just been proven wrong. And somewhere in the distance, more human ships were already moving toward other conquered territories. The galaxy was about to remember what it meant to abandon humanity. The Chamber of Stars had not been this full in over a century. Representatives from 11 species filled the ancient hall, the beings of living crystal who had existed for millions of years, the still shaken from their defeat at the border, the creatures who communicated through pheromones and vibrations, and 8 other species, each one powerful, each one ancient, each one terrified. Outside the station, human ships filled the sky, 200 vessels, each one bristling with weapons that the conquered had no defense against. They had arrived 3 days ago and simply waited. No demands, no threats, just silent, patient presence. Today, the humans had finally requested a meeting. Supreme Commander walked into the Chamber of Stars with 12 officers behind him, 1 officer for each species that had voted to abandon Earth. They moved in perfect formation, their footsteps echoing through the ancient hall. Was 60 years old. His body carried 17 combat scars from the wars that had united humanity during the Long Dark. His eyes had been replaced with sensors that could detect changes in body temperature, chemical signatures, and electromagnetic fields. He could tell when someone was lying. He could tell when someone was afraid. Right now, everyone in the chamber was afraid. He stopped in the center of the room and looked around slowly. The representatives sat in their ancient seats, surrounded by advisors and guards who looked very nervous. None of them spoke. None of them moved. Smiled. 300 years ago, he said, this chamber had 12 seats, 1 for each member of the Galactic Conquered. Humanity held one of those seats. We were new to the stars. We were young and hopeful and naive. We believed that the galaxy would welcome us. He paused. His voice was calm, conversational, almost friendly. That made it more terrifying. Then the cascade came. Our world was dying. We came to you, our galactic family, and we asked for help. He turned slowly, meeting the eyes of each representative. Do you remember what you said? The representative, an ancient crystal being named Elder, spoke first. Commander, that was 3 centuries ago. The individuals who made that decision are long dead. We cannot be held responsible for the actions of our ancestors. Tilted his head. His sensors detected elevated stress hormones in this crystalline structure. The alien was lying, or at least avoiding the truth. Elder said, "You are 4,000 years old. You were alive when the vote was taken. You were one of the leading voices arguing against intervention." The chamber fell silent. The other representatives turned to stare at the continued. You said, and I quote, "Humans are a species of limited potential. Their culture is violent, their technology primitive, and their projected as a civilization is less than 5,000 years. Investing resources in their survival would be an inefficient use of conquered assets." He pulled out a small device and activated it. A holographic display appeared, showing the exact document. His own words, recorded in official conquered archives. "We found your records," said, "all of them. Every message, every vote, every private communication about humanity's extinction. Some of you expressed regret. Some of you argued for intervention." His eyes hardened. Most of you did not. He began walking around the chamber, stopping before each representative in turn. They calculated the economic cost of saving us and decided we were not worth it. He stopped before the representative, who could not meet his eyes. Your people threw a celebration when the vote passed. You called it the burden lifted. He moved on. They argued that humans were too aggressive to integrate successfully. You predicted we would start wars and destabilize the region. He stopped before the representative. You were half right. We are aggressive, but not in the way you feared. One by one, he confronted each species. He quoted their own words back to them. He showed them documents they had thought were secret. He reminded them of jokes they had made about human extinction, celebrations they had held, relief they had expressed. By the time he finished, the chamber was completely silent. Several representatives were visibly shaking. One of them, a delicate creature covered in feathers, had begun to cry. Returned to the center of the room. "We are not here to destroy you," he said. "We had 300 years to become monsters. We survived extinction, rebuilt our species from ashes, and created weapons that your shields cannot stop. We could have come here seeking revenge. We could have turned your worlds to dust the way you let our world turn to dust." He paused. "We chose otherwise." The representatives looked at each other in confusion. This was not what they had expected. They had prepared for threats, for demands of unconditional surrender, for war. Continued. "Humanity does not want revenge. Revenge would make us like you. It would mean letting our anger define us forever. We have carried that anger for 3 centuries. It kept us alive, but we do not want to carry it forever." He activated another display. A list appeared in the air above him. "Instead, we want justice. We want balance. We want to ensure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else." He began reading from the list. "First, full membership in the Galactic Concord will be restored to humanity. We will have a seat in this chamber. Our voice will be heard." The representatives nodded slowly. This was reasonable. "Second, reparations. You will transfer technology, resources, and territory to humanity. The exact amounts will be calculated based on what we lost during the abandonment and what we could have become if we had been saved." This caused murmuring. Several representatives exchanged worried glances, but they did not object. "Third, a permanent human presence on each Concord. Embassies, trading posts, military observers. You will never again be able to forget that we exist." More murmuring, louder this time, but still no objections. "Fourth," his voice softened slightly, "a memorial, a monument visible from every conquered capital, inscribed with the names of every human who died because of the abandonment. 7 billion names. You will see them every day. You will remember what your decision cost." The chamber was silent again. 7 billion names. The number was almost incomprehensible. Elder finally spoke. "And if we refuse these terms?" "Did not hesitate. Then we will take what we are owed by force. We will destroy your fleets, occupy your worlds, and write those 7 billion names on the ruins of your civilizations. We would prefer not to, but do not mistake our preference for weakness." He looked around the chamber one final time. "You spent 300 years certain we would die. You were wrong. You spent 300 years assuming you would never face consequences for abandoning us. You were wrong about that too." He straightened to his full height. Behind him, his 12 officers stood at perfect attention. "What happens next is your choice. You can accept our terms and work to build a better galaxy. Or you can refuse, and we will remind you why you should have saved us when you had the chance." He turned and walked toward the door. His officers followed in perfect formation. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. "You have 1 hour to decide. Choose wisely." The door closed behind him. In the Chamber of Stars, 11 species began to argue among themselves. Some wanted to fight. Some wanted to surrender immediately. Some were still trying to process the fact that humanity had survived it all. Outside, 200 human ships waited in silence. Inside, the clock was ticking. And for the first time in 300 years, the galaxy remembered what it meant to face the consequences of abandoning humanity. The vote took 47 minutes. It was unanimous. The Galactic Concord accepted humanity's terms. Every species, from the ancient to the youngest member races, voted to comply. There was no debate about fighting. Their military advisors had already calculated the odds. Human ships could absorb their weapons. Human soldiers could survive environments that would kill conquered troops. Human technology had evolved in ways they could not match. But more than that, they had seen something in the human commander's eyes, something patient, something that had waited 3 centuries for this moment. They understood that humanity was offering them a choice between peace and extinction. They chose peace. 5 years later, Commander stood in the Memorial Plaza on the conquered capital world. The monument rose half a kilometer into the purple sky, a spire of black stone that could be seen from everywhere in the city. On its surface, billions of names were carved in letters so small that you had to stand close to read them. 7 billion names, every human who had died during the abandonment and the long dark that followed. Was Admiral's great-great-granddaughter. She had grown up hearing stories about the woman who had refused to let humanity die. She had studied her ancestors' speeches, her strategies, her final words before she died of radiation sickness 60 years after the abandonment. Make them remember, had said. Make them pay, but do not become like them. Touched the monument's base. Her ancestor's name was there, carved alongside billions of others. All the people who had carried humanity through the darkness. Beside her, Ambassador reviewed the day's reports on a handheld device. He was the first human to hold permanent diplomatic status in the conquered. His job was to ensure that the peace held, that the treaties were honored, that humanity's voice was heard in every council chamber. Trade agreements with thee are proceeding well, he said. They have transferred the first shipment of crystal matrix technology. Our engineers are already studying it. And still nervous around us, but they are cooperating. Their latest cultural exchange delegation arrived yesterday. Watched a group of alien tourists walk past the memorial. They were the species that had once called humans too aggressive to integrate. Now they stopped to read the names on the monument. Some of them took photographs. Some of them simply stood in silence. Do you think they understand yet? She asked. Looked up from his device. Understand what? That we did not come back for revenge. She turned to face him. We came back to make sure it never happens again, to anyone. In the 5 years since the reckoning, humanity had become something unexpected. They had taken their place in the conquered, yes. They had collected their reparations and built their embassies, but they had also done something else. They had started helping. Human ships now patrolled regions that the conquered had abandoned. The outer territories, the dangerous sectors, the places where younger species struggled to survive. When distress calls came from those regions, humans were often the first to respond. There was a species called the who lived on a small world near the galactic rim. Their sun was dying, slowly but surely. They had requested help from the conquered decades ago. The response had been familiar, economically non-viable, insufficient return on investment, a polite refusal dressed up in bureaucratic language. Humanity had responded differently. General, now 70 years old and retired from active command, had personally led the rescue mission. Human ships had evacuated the entire population to a new world. Human engineers had helped them build new cities. Human doctors had treated their sick and wounded. When they asked why humanity was helping them, had given a simple answer. Because someone should have helped us. No one did, so we are going to be the ones we wished existed. They were not the only ones. All across the galaxy, humanity was answering the calls that the conquered ignored. They were protecting the weak, rescuing the abandoned, offering aid to species that had nothing to offer in return. Some of the conquered species did not understand. They asked why humans were wasting resources on species that could never repay them. They pointed out that it was economically inefficient, strategically questionable, logically flawed. Humanity did not care. We spent 300 years becoming strong enough to demand justice, Supreme Commander had said in his final address before retirement. Now we need to spend the next 300 years becoming wise enough to offer mercy. looked up at the memorial. The sun was setting behind it, turning the black stone to gold. In the fading light, the billions of names seemed to glow. "They will understand eventually," said. "That is why we are still here." He put away his device and stood beside her. Together, they watched the last tourists leave the plaza. Soon, the monument would be alone in the darkness, 7 billion names keeping silent watch over a galaxy that had once forgotten them. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about Earth," said. "About the oceans and the forests and the cities that touched the clouds. She never saw any of it. She was born underground, like her mother and her grandmother before her. And now," smiled, "and now we are rebuilding it. The cascade has finally passed. The radiation is fading. In another century, Earth might have forests again, oceans again, cities that touch the clouds." She turned to face the stars appearing in the darkening sky. Human ships moved among them, alongside vessels from a dozen different species. The galaxy that had abandoned humanity was now a galaxy where humanity belonged. "We survived the impossible," she said. "We came back from extinction. We could have used that power to destroy everyone who hurt us. Instead, we are using it to protect everyone else." Nodded slowly. "That is what makes us different from them. They abandoned us because we had nothing to offer. We are saving others because it is the right thing to do." High above them, a human patrol ship responded to a distress call from a species had never heard of. In the conquered council chambers, human diplomats argued for aid to developing worlds. On distant planets, human soldiers stood guard over species too weak to protect themselves. 300 years ago, humanity had been abandoned, left to die in the darkness while the galaxy moved on without them. Now they had returned, not as conquerors though they could have been, not as destroyers though they had the power, but as protectors, as guardians, as the ones who would never let another species suffer what they had suffered. The last light faded from the sky. The memorial stood in darkness, its 7 billion names invisible but still present, still remembered. Placed her hand against the cold stone one final time. "We paid our debt," she whispered. "Now we are making sure no one else ever has to pay the same price." She turned and walked away. Behind her, the monument kept its silent watch, and somewhere in the stars, humanity continued its work. They had been abandoned once. They would not abandon anyone else. This was their payment. This was their purpose. This was what 300 years of anger had finally become. Not revenge. Justice. And in the end, that made all the difference.